As the execution order rang out, a bloodied German shepherd burst through the wall, papers clenched in his jaws, eyes blazing. The soldiers froze. The truth was about to surface in the most unexpected way. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The cell was colder than Rourke remembered it being. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was Axel's arrival that made the chill settle deeper into his bones. Concrete sweat bled through the walls, and the metallic tang of rusted bars clung to every breath like guilt that wouldn't leave. Rourke sat on the edge of the cot, what passed for a bed in this godless place, his wrists resting loosely on his knees, the bruises on his knuckles still pulsing from last week's interrogation. They hadn't broken him, not completely, but they'd come close, not with fists, with lies. The tribunal had spoken in clipped tones, behind dark eyes and polished badges. They had evidence, they said, witnesses, a burned village. But none had seen Rourke give the order, because he hadn't. The mission had gone sideways, someone else's chaos, someone else's cover-up. But it was Rourke's name on the report, and that had sealed his fate. He hadn't fought the sentence, not much. He was too tired to scream at shadows, too proud to beg, until he thought of Axel. They hadn't served together like handler and tool. They'd moved as one, through jungle and desert, city ruins and mountain fog. Axel wasn't just a dog. He was memory, muscle, and instinct fused into fur and breath. He was the only one who'd been there the night the operation went dark, the only one who'd heard what Rourke had heard, seen what Rourke had seen. But dogs couldn't testify. They could only wait. When the guards wheeled the crate in, muttering in a language Rourke didn't speak but didn't need to understand, he stood. Not fast, not eager. Like a man stepping to the edge of something too deep to measure. The crate door opened. Axel stepped forward, one paw at a time, unsure, eyes scanning. He was older now, grayer around the muzzle. But Rourke saw the recognition bloom in those amber eyes like a flare in the dark. Axel froze, then lowered himself fully, nose brushing concrete. His body didn't tremble, but his breath did. It came in short, contained bursts, as if even now he was trying to stay strong, for Rourke. And that's when it hit the captain. Not fear of death, not rage at injustice, but a single hollow ache. Axel doesn't know he's about to lose me forever. Rourke dropped to his knees, hands wrapped around the bars. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, throat thick. "They're gonna kill me tomorrow." Axel's ears twitched. His eyes locked on Rourke's. And in them, beyond the loyalty, beyond the pain, there was a flicker of something ancient and primal, something that doesn't accept death, something that doesn't forget. The mood in the prison twisted just after midnight. It wasn't something you could hear or see at first. It was something that settled in the bones. A quiet unease that clung to the air like smoke from a fire that hadn't yet been lit. Guards grew restless in their rotations. The shadows in the hallway seemed to lean differently. And in the back kennels, Axel refused to sleep. He hadn't touched the meat they'd thrown into his crate hours ago, bloody, undercooked, stinking of disdain. Instead, he paced, not with panic, but with purpose. 4 steps forward, a turn, then again, until his claws scraped raw lines into the cement floor. By 2 a.m., the pacing stopped. What came next was worse. The howl that ripped from Axel's throat was not the howl of hunger or fear. It was war music. Long, hollow, echoing in every cell like a death knell. Prisoners stirred. One began to cry. Another muttered a prayer in broken Arabic. Even the guards, hardened men with calloused hearts, hesitated before approaching the kennel wing. One of them cursed in Russian and struck the bars with a baton, trying to silence the dog. But Axel didn't flinch. Blood painted his front paws, raw from digging at the floor beneath the grate. And his eyes, those sharp, soldier's eyes, never blinked. They weren't pleading. They weren't afraid. They were calculating. The guards decided he was a liability and rolled the crate down the east corridor, far from the cells, locking it in a storage room near the compound's central utilities hub. "Let the mutt scream in there," one muttered, slamming the door behind him. But Axel wasn't screaming anymore. He was waiting. What they hadn't known, what they couldn't know, was that in the brief moment Rourke and Axel had shared earlier that day, just as the crate door was closing, Rourke had leaned forward and whispered a command beneath his breath. It was buried inside a cough, masked by the clank of steel. But Axel heard it, because Axel was trained to listen through chaos. He had been taught to detect the ticking of a buried IED beneath a diesel engine, to smell cordite through layers of cement, to respond not to tone, but intent. The command Rourke had given was one they'd used in only the direst scenarios: seek and disrupt. Hours before dawn, a junior guard on monitor duty jolted upright. On screen, Axel sat outside the compound's central electrical panel, perfectly still, staring into the lens. His tail slowly wagged left, then right. Then everything went black. Sirens stuttered. Lights sputtered and died. Electronic locks disengaged with sharp metallic snaps. Down the main hallway, gates swung open like the mouth of a beast unhinged. Guards shouted, radios hissed, footsteps thundered, and by the time someone screamed, "Where's the dog?" the crate was empty. Axel was gone. The execution yard was built for intimidation, not efficiency. Narrow, high-walled, and dusted in chalk-colored sand that refused to settle. It echoed with the kind of silence that wasn't absence of sound, but the suffocation of it. Captain Rourke stood tethered to the post, ankles bound, wrists tied behind his back with coarse hemp that bit deeper with every subtle breath. His uniform, faded from sun and sweat, hung off his frame like skin too big for the bones beneath. In front of him, 12 men stood shoulder to shoulder, rifles leveled, boots locked in formation. No masks, no ceremony, just obedience wrapped in fatigue. The commander's voice cut the air like a rusted blade. "Aim." Rourke lifted his eyes. He didn't pray. He didn't speak. He just looked beyond them, to nothing. "First!" The wall behind him exploded in a spray of brick and powder, and time collapsed. Shouts broke rank. Rifles swung wide. A body hurled from the smoke. Not human, but deliberate. A flash of black and tan, a blur of teeth and muscle. Axel. He landed hard, rolled, skidded to a halt. His flank was streaked with blood, one ear torn, and in his mouth, a bundle of weathered manila folders clenched tight like a lifeline. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He stood over the scattered pages like a sentinel at a sacred tomb. No one moved. The dust curled through the air as if afraid to touch the ground. A soldier stepped forward. Then another. A translator, trembling, knelt and gathered the papers, fingers twitching through declassified fragments, half-burned signatures, time-stamped directives with Department of Defense letterheads, words in English, Arabic, names, coordinates, voices encoded on tape. Every page bled the truth. "Where did these come from?" the commander snapped. A voice answered from the tribunal's observation tower. "The warden's office," it said. "The dog found them under the floorboards." The silence after that wasn't heavy. It was hollow, cracked open, dangerous. Axel didn't move. His eyes flicked from face to face like a seasoned interrogator gauging the guilt in the room. When the commander approached him, slow, hands raised, Axel growled low, a sound buried deep in his chest, as if he knew this man had once signed off on Rourke's death. The tribunal convened behind closed doors. The same room that had held Rourke's sentencing now hosted a reckoning of its own. Judges flipped through the pages with shaking hands, their skin turning the color of old parchment. One reached for a glass of water. Another stared at the wall like it might forgive him. And outside, beneath a sky still bruised by smoke, Axel lay at Rourke's feet, head resting on his paws, eyes closed, not in exhaustion, but in something that looked a lot like peace. He had done what no one else dared. He had taken the stand. The prison gates moaned open like old wounds. No banners, no brass bands, just wind and silence and two silhouettes stepping out of shadow and into light, one upright, scarred and silent, the other low to the ground, tail swaying like a metronome ticking toward peace. Captain Thomas Rourke and Sergeant Axel crossed the threshold without a word. They had no need for them. The bond between man and dog had been soldered in the forge of fire, betrayal, and something older than language: loyalty. Inside the walls, the echoes still lingered. Shouts, verdicts, the bark of rifles not yet fired. Now those halls lay stripped of power. The tribunal that once condemned Rourke dissolved under the weight of its own corruption. The warden, once smug in his untouchable station, had been paraded out in cuffs, red-faced and stammering. He'd buried the truth beneath his office floor, but the dog had dug it back up. The guards who once sneered as Rourke limped past now stood at attention, eyes lowered, boots welded to the dirt. Not one offered a salute. Not one dared speak. Respect wrapped in shame made better silence than words ever could. By nightfall, Rourke was no longer captain. He didn't protest when they stripped the title. He didn't want it. What he carried now wasn't rank. It was truth, and the weight of being believed, finally, without having to beg for it. He vanished from headlines within days, taking the only companion who had never abandoned him and retreating west to the edge of Montana, where the pines whispered old soldiers' songs and the air tasted like absolution. The cabin he found was barely a structure, just 4 walls and a roof near the tree line, but it was enough to breathe again, enough to rest. He let the world forget him. Axel, for his part, adapted immediately. He chased squirrels, drank from the river, and rolled in the tall grass like he hadn't once outmaneuvered an entire military facility. They never spoke of what had happened. Some things were too sacred to unwrap. But on the nights when frost crawled down the window panes and the wood stove popped like distant gunfire, Rourke would sit in the worn armchair, boots off, body slack, and Axel would pad over, curl up tight against his legs, and let out a sigh that spoke volumes. Rourke would lean down then, whisper into the fur between Axel's ears, voice low and reverent. "You saved me. Twice." And Axel, eyes half closed, would rest his head against Rourke's knee. They were no longer soldiers. They were survivors.